Well, the idea in a lifetime, and a long time in the industry, what stands out, what stands out in your ear and in your mind. Well, again, personal anecdote. When David Van Couvering came to Nashville to meet this so-called sage, which Bob Moog had called me, he showed me the Minimoog. I was a bit taken aback. I felt like I was the local expert, Why was this guy coming in showing me the Minimoog? I knew about the Minimoog and so forth and so on. And I told him that I'll never amount to anything. Well, I subsequently went up and worked in the Buffalo area. And as a matter of fact, Jan Hammer and Billy Cobham came to the Williamsville plant. Now, we talked about plants being distinctive. It was a real plant. And we had real people running the plant. And, in other words, there was a whole level of hierarchy that the old Trumansburg plant didn't have. Interestingly, when Norlin acquired Moog, all of the original engineers quit. They didn't want to move to Buffalo, for one thing, which is where Williamsville is. So it was like an epiphany. So Billy Cobham and Jan Hammer came to the Williamsville plant, and I had the Moog 1130 drum, which I've got one over here. We can photograph it later. And I showed them the percussion controller, the 1130. And no, don't play so many notes. Okay, look, don't play the keyboard, just touch notes on the keyboard and move the knobs and dials to Jan and Billy. Yeah, hit it and wait and see what happens and see what he's done. Just giving them ideas, about what to do. And as a matter of fact, that night it was kind of funny. We were sitting there in a smoke-filled room, of course, huge venue in Rochester. It's when Mahavishnu Orchestra opened for Frank Zappa. That was a pretty good double bill. So we were up there, and as a matter of fact, Frank, and I knew him, I said, well, why don't you guys come up to the room, to the suite. And Bob, fortunately, it was Bob saying it, because I would have been afraid to. Oh, no, we want to hear Mahavishnu, so we did. It was marvelous, marvelous. And as a matter of fact, speaking of the 1130 drum that I'd shown them that afternoon, I sat there and they were going crazy with this thing in a break, and I was sitting there in the marijuana-filled smoke, I turned to the kid, and Bob was right here. The kid next to me, I didn't know. I turned to him and said, hey, listen, man, all of that sound is being triggered by that one little drum. And he says, oh, no way, man. No, he couldn't believe it, and I barely could. But what was critical, though, about that concert, I'd heard some people play the Minimoog, but I'd never really heard Jan, all sails to the wind, playing a Minimoog with Mahavishnu. He easily stood toe-to-toe with McLaughlin on guitar and Goodman on violin, and swapped 4s and 8s, and it was incredible the amount of flexibility he was showing. And it was like clouds lifted from my mind. It was like I realized, the Minimoog is not a sound cloud generator. It is a voice under control. Because, being an academic prior to that, we were making the sound of 40 cows walking through 38 acres of marshmallows, and strange music and stuff like that. It was just fine. But to hear him be an instrumentalist on par with powerful instruments, the guitar, the electric guitar, and electrified violin, it was just thunderstruck. It was like, oh my gosh, that's how I can sell this thing. It's a voice under control, and that's why the left-hand controllers are so important. That's why the phrasing aspect of single triggering is so important. That's why the Moog filter and overdriven, the glorious sound is so important, because it's a voice under control, and it's a new voice. Now, in my naivete as a young man, I really thought that electronic musical instruments would join the orchestra. I played in two orchestras professionally, Tallahassee and Nashville, local, metropolitan, although Thor Johnson was the conductor. I was not even full-time with Nashville. I played third, fourth trumpet, offstage trumpet, whatever. But I did have that experience, and I was hopeful that these new instruments will just come in to the symphony. Hasn't turned out that way. Another misestimate, of just how conservative musicians are. Some people will remember Milli Vanilli. Well, we have things called boy bands. Boy bands are usually people who maybe they sing, maybe they don't, but they sure dance, and they look good, they're pretty, and they dance and they jive around, and they generally lip sync, move their mouth as though they're syncing. I'm telling this to people who don't know the business, possibly. And of course, who knows whether it's their voices or not. It usually is. But Milli Vanilli, turns out it wasn't even their voices. I mean, it was these glorious-looking guys, dreadlocks, beautiful, and they had great presentation skills and so forth. Some very different people singing. You would have thought that people, it was like people would run in circles, scream and shout, cats and dogs living together. Everybody went crazy about Milli Vanilli doing this. And I'm sitting there thinking, because I'd been into film for a very long time, well, nobody carried on like this when Marnie Nixon sang behind Natalie Wood in West Side Story. That is not Natalie Wood's voice. I've actually heard Natalie Wood singing those parts of the score of West Side Story. They did make some recordings. Marnie Nixon did so much better a job. And she sang behind Marilyn Monroe, and the sequel to Gone with the Wind, I don't know why they made it, but they did. And in one of those cases, the director decided, I really don't like this actress's voice. I'm just going to dub in another actress totally. Every word that she spoke was dubbed in by somebody else. When Alfred Hitchcock did, his first sound film, Blackmail, it was Goat Gland, as they called it, part silent, had intertitles, then all of a sudden it broke into sound and dialogue. When he did that film, he had an Austrian actress named Jenny Andra, and she had a very thick Austrian accent. And he just felt like he couldn't do that. So didn't even have overdubbing at that point, didn't even have the technical means, but he effected this by having an English actress standing off camera, speaking into a microphone, and Jenny Andra moved her mouth, and the English actress said the words. What I'm pointing out here is there's a long tradition in film for artificiality. And for some reason, in music, it's just the worst thing there can be. It's not authentic. And I'm thinking, what's authentic? When you make a film of the Civil War and the film takes 3.5 hours, well, I'm afraid the American Civil War lasted a little longer than 3.5 hours. And nobody stands up and says, wait a minute, this is Appomattox. It's way too soon, We should be barely in the early Shiloh or someplace. These kinds of things. So this is mostly a matter of perspective and enculturation and things like this. Nobody in the film industry thinks about artificiality. They know they're dealing with possibly the most artificial art form you can have. Now, I like artificiality, and I would be drawn to film and electroacoustic music. But for me, artificiality is not a negative word. Artificiality simply means new possibilities. What is so natural about putting paint on a horse's hide or a canvas or something? Trombones don't grow out of the ground. Martin guitars don't grow on trees. There's nothing natural about musical instruments. So once you get over that, then you become more accepting for a whole range of things. But I think that one thing, in terms of what freed me and opened me up to the Minimoog and its sound and everything, was Jan Hammer. And many, many people would have said the same thing, especially the pitch bending. He was the master at that and taught almost everybody how to do that. And I imitated him when I did in my clinics. I would play those licks and realize, oh, I don't have to play all the notes on the keyboard. I can play a lot of them on the wheel, and they'll sound much more like a melodic instrument, a solo instrument.